'Cause like a winter tonight, I thought I would always have light. The quick flash that you gave to me, so dark I could barely see. Looking
from wherever you are around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about a very, what I call a head-herder topic. It's free will. Do we really have free will? Did you want to see this show because you chose to see the show? We're going to find out with Dr. Kane. Dr. Kane is professor of philosophy from the University of Texas. Welcome to the circle, Dr. Kane.
Oh, glad to be here.
Well, this is a very, like I called it before, a head-herder topic. Free will. How much of our choices are really made by us, and who is us? But we'll find out in a little bit from you. Can you give us a little insight of why you chose this topic to write about?
Well, it's a topic that is, when I went into philosophy, I didn't like some of the more abstract topics. I like those that bore on everyday life, something that really troubled us and interested us in our everyday affairs. And I hit on the free will problem because it's a big one these days and everybody's talking about it. Not so much then, but I was intrigued by the problem of how to make sense of it. And nowadays, there's so many books and writings and popular stuff out there saying we don't have it that it's become quite a big topic everywhere. And the neuroscientists have got into the debate about it, claiming that, the brain does it all and we don't. And I think that's false. I think it's wrong. I've been a defender of free will for a very long time, and now that there are so many threats to it from various sciences, especially from neuroscience, I get called on quite a bit to discuss it and try to defend it.
Let me ask you this question. We're starting right off with the hot, heavy questions here. Neuroscience, I know they believe it. I know there's a study out there. I think I even read it in your book, actually. Let me reference his book, Oxford Handbook of Free Will by Robert Kane, Dr. Robert Kane. We got the other one, Contemporary Introduction to Free Will. You can see both of these books here. Highly recommend them if you want to know about free will. But neuroscience does talk a little bit about this. And one of the studies it mentioned was, hey, Dr. Kane, before 7 milliseconds or 700 milliseconds before Dr. Kane is going to say something, his brain's already activated. So there's no way he's got free will.
Yes, this neuroscientist Benjamin Libet, Libet, is well known for having started the experiments of these kinds, and there have been many experiments following him on this topic, namely that there's something in the brain suggesting people will make a particular choice before they make it unconsciously. It's a big question, though, however, it's called the readiness potential, and it can come in milliseconds before or even seconds before. There's a bit of controversy about exactly what it means, whether it is already a choice or just an urge to make a choice, or whether it's just a signal to get yourself prepared or ready to choose. So it's often put forward as meaning, well, you really choose unconsciously before you actually are even aware of making the choice. You've already made it. And that's really simplifying to a good deal. There's real controversy about what this thing means. It may very well be just an urge to do it without the final choice being made. Also, you might be able to, if some unconscious choice is being made, you might choose to veto it after that consciously. So there's really a lot of questions about this. We do know that with regard to action, the brain prepares you for action. If you're about to do even a very simple action like open a door or raise your arm or whatever, the brain does unconsciously prepare you for that action. It has a kind of it gives a kind of image of it, so to speak, unconsciously, mind you, so that when you actually do perform the action, you do it in accordance with that preparatory stage. And then there's a stage afterwards where you check on whether you have done it properly or not. There's a before stage and an after stage. There's a very well-known neuroscientist from Berlin named Martin Voss, who does studies with schizophrenia on this. And what he has discovered, he and his researchers, is that schizophrenics have a problem with that earlier phase of preparing for an action. So they are not very good at foreseeing things. That's why they do sometimes very, things that we would regard as risky or not well thought out and so on. And yet their after the action phase is quite intact. So they can often have remorse when they've done something silly because of the preparation.
Is that a lack of free will?
There is a lot of unconscious processing that goes along with human freedom. But in my view, it doesn't mean that consciousness doesn't have a role to play, and it doesn't mean that we're not free.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Is there a lack of free will then in regards to those schizophrenics when they're doing that behavior?
Certainly it's diminished. Certainly it's diminished by their inability to see clearly the consequences of what they are doing.
And I know it's kind of hard to quantify, but what is the percentage of the unconscious involvement and conscious involvement in free will?
I don't think it's quantifiable. Certainly not at the present time. But I think there's a tremendous amount of unconscious processing going on, whatever we do. I mean, consider once again a simple action like raising your arm. Do you really know what's going on inside there? With the neurons and the eye is involved and the input and what you're doing, and you're looking to see have I got the doorknob there? You're doing that automatically, right? And if you missed it, however, you'd have to come back. Maybe if your eyes were out of focus and you didn't hit it, then you'd get some reaction and you'd come right back and do it. But you don't know what's going on underneath. In the neurons, in the muscles, and so on and so forth. This is an interesting phenomenon about human action. We have what I like to call macro control over our actions, but we don't have micro control over all the individual things, what's going on in the brain, what's going on in the muscles, and so on and so forth. We don't have to control all the petty events involved in our actions to control the actions. And as a matter of fact, we can even go backwards. This is what Aristotle mentioned about causation in the mind. For example, you know the famous modern dance person. Her name was Martha Graham. My wife alerted me to her years ago. I don't know if you ever heard of her. Mm-hmm. She used to teach her students how to flex individual muscles, say a muscle in their back, that we normally don't have a clue about how to flex, right? Wow. And she would get them to be able to move individual muscles, that we don't know how to move them and so on. But consider this, consider that there was a particular muscle in my back, and I couldn't move it specifically the way someone might direct me to move it. But somebody told me that if I raised my arm like this, that muscle would move just the way I wanted to move it. Well, I don't know how to move it directly the way you move it, but I can move it. I'll raise my arm, and it will move exactly the way it's supposed to move. well, this is very odd, because what I did was I did the effect, and I made the cause move the way I wanted it, because it's the muscle movement is part of the cause of this. But I don't know how to do that. I only know how to do the final end in order to move the earlier thing. And that's what we can do with our mind. And there's nothing mysterious about this. We can project into the future, do a macro event, and thereby bring about all these micro events. So what we have over our actions and even our choices, when we're talking free will, is we have macro control over our thought processes and so on, even though we don't have a clue what's going on in the micro part of it. See what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great explanation.
Yeah, I mean, some people, this was used to be called, Aristotle called this final causation. You bring about the cause by doing the effect. By producing the end, you produce what causes the end. But it's not mysterious. It's not mysterious. It's something pretty plain and simple. But it's what we're capable of when we are projective beings who can do things with goals in mind. As I say, and with free choice, I think something similar to that is going on. But the normal assumption is, with regard to free will, is that we're determined, and that somehow the brain is a deterministic mechanism. You see, and there are even arguments about this as to whether this has been the critical argument for centuries: is free will compatible with determinism? Are we determined in a certain way? And through the centuries, this has been the big debate. People have wondered about free will. People have wondered about free will down through the centuries whenever they have gotten the idea that our choices and our actions might be controlled by factors of which we are unaware and we don't have control over. Whenever people have thought there might be some forces or some things that might be controlling our behavior that we don't have control over and we're indeed unaware of, then that's when the problem of free will arises in whatever culture. And it can happen in different ways. It occurred as fatalism in some of the ancient cultures, that maybe it was fate. We don't have any knowledge of fate, right?
Yeah.
And then a little later, it was God, and God's predestining us in some way. And we not knowing it, or just God foreknowing everything we do. And then later, biology comes along, and people wondered whether it was the genes and our upbringing and our heredity that determined us in some way. And then Freud and others came along and said, well, it's the unconscious determining us. Again, becoming aware of more things that lie behind what we do that we never noticed, we're unaware of, and maybe they are determining us to do what we do. Now, the last thing in this chain has been the development of neuroscience. Now that we're thinking more about the brain, right? Clearly, that's another thing. We're not aware of it. We're not conscious of it. So there's been a whole history of these things where determinism comes into play, whether it's fatalistic or theological or biological or psychological or neurological. And this is the history. And the latest thing in the chain is, of course, the neuroscientists, which is the hot thing now. There's been a long history of this sort of thing.
Do you think, is that the toughest one for you to overcome, is neuroscience?
Well, that's the big one nowadays. But I think the main thing you have to deal with the issues to begin with about determinism in general. Now, I define determinism, which covers all of these different possibilities. Determinism is basically the view that given the past at any given time and the laws governing the universe, there's only one possible future. That's what determinism means. And of course, you could put it in all these different guises. Given the past up to the moment, everything that has occurred, and the laws governing the universe, there's only one possible future. Well, that seems at least to be in contradiction to free will, since if I'm, as you put it a little earlier, if I'm deliberating about what to do, should I leave or should I stay here? If I'm deliberating about that or anything important in life, I'm deliberating about whether to steal or not to steal or whatever, and I'm in the process of deliberating, I assume that either choice is possible. Otherwise, what would be the point? But if determinism is true, only one thing is possible at any moment, given what's already occurred. And so there's at least an apparent conflict there with determinism of any kind. And if, given my biology, my heredity, my genes, my environment, only one thing is possible, I don't think you can have free will in a deep sense. Similarly, if given what's going on in my brain at any given time, only one thing is possible, same thing. If indeed God has predestined us all for one thing possible, and so on. You know, it's funny, in Milton's poem, Paradise Lost, he has the angels, in the prologue, he has the angels debating in heaven about how could it be that God made us the way we are, gave us all the things we do have, and so on and so forth, and yet gave us free will so that we could reject him. How is that possible? And Milton says, and debating this question, the angels were in endless mazes lost.
I'm sure some of our audience is feeling that way.
They couldn't figure it out.
I'm sure some of our audience feels that way too.
Right. I always like to say, boy, that's not encouraging for us mortals trying to think about this question. But it is a very, very difficult one. But anyway, that's the idea of determinism. And some of this new neuroscience is just the latest in a long history of people coming up with various ideas suggesting that, well, we don't know it, we're unaware of what's influencing us, but something is, and we're not in control.
Dr. Kane, we have about 2 or 3 minutes left, and we have a fastball question we have to throw at you too at the end. But before the fastball question, the last question I have is, do you think this new phenomena, as you mentioned earlier, all these books about, hey, we don't have free will, our unconscious is controlling, our neuroscience is controlling it, do you think this is more of society deferring responsibility?
I don't think the scientists are necessarily trying to do that, but I think the outcome is deferring responsibility. I mean, the question is, there is some psychological studies which have been made to suggest that they try to first sit people down and give them some readings which suggest they don't have free will, and then they find out they're more liable to cheat or do other things because they don't believe they have free will anymore. So they kind of can rationalize their behavior here in terms of doing things. And there's been psychological experiments to show that. So my feeling is that if we start letting people know they don't have free will and they're not responsible for our behavior, for their behavior, then we may be in trouble. Now, there are people that say, oh, that would be better because then we wouldn't punish people so harshly and we would treat them as sick and whatever. And in some ways, it might be better. But I'm afraid there's just too many rationalizers and evil people and exploiters in this world. And the worst thing you could do is tell them they don't have free will, so they're not ultimately responsible for what they do.
I completely agree with that. Are you ready for your fastball question?
You just gave it.
Oh, no, not that one.
Oh, not that one? You got another one that's worse?
We'll call that a change-up. Here's the real fastball question.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Did you choose your wife, or did your wife choose you?
Oh, that is an interesting question indeed. I think we both, that's an easy way out to say we both chose each other. But we met on the Yale campus. I was in the graduate school at Yale, and she was in the drama school. And she rode around campus with the ugliest bike I've ever seen. And I always said, I looked at her and I said, gee, one of the most beautiful women on campus on the ugliest bicycle. And I had an image I was going to marry this woman. And I found out the reason the bicycle was so ugly is she didn't want it to ever be stolen. But anyway,
Well,
we did meet at a coffee after a Sunday mass, and there was a rabbi visiting there, and she had an interest in me. So when I was going by at this coffee, she grabbed my arm and said, "I think you have something worthwhile to contribute to this conversation." And I had to think right on my head. I wasn't even in on the conversation, but I apparently said something pretty insightful and interesting, because she said, "At that moment, I fell in love with you."
oh,
I
Dr.
guess I have
Kane.
to say that she did. She was really she was really the one, I think.
Well, I think you hit that question out of the ballpark. Thank you so much, Dr. Kane, for being on the circle. We truly enjoyed it. And we want to thank you, too, everyone, for joining us. I like Dr. Kane's conclusion that we do make conscious decisions, that we have free will, because that means you chose to watch the show. I like that. Remember, our motto is simple. Wherever there's psychology involved, we are there. We'll see you next time, everyone.